I hope the stream is working. There's a little bit of tape holding two mics together. I hope they're working. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Stepanyan. I'm one of OWASP London chapter leaders. There are 3 OWASP London chapter leaders: myself, Andrew Letze, and Sharif Mansour. Andrew unfortunately couldn't make it today, and Sharif is sick. So I will give you an update about Sharif a bit later. If you're going to take pictures tonight, please make sure, and if you share them on social media, make sure to use our hashtag, which is OWASP London. Mention us as OWASP London. We are OWASP London on most social media, on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Quick update on Sharif. So those of you who are regulars probably know that Sharif was diagnosed with cancer last summer. He was diagnosed with leukemia, and OWASP has been running a blood donation drive because of this, because obviously in the way how blood donations work in the UK is any patient who needs blood, they can only get them from volunteers, right? And this is why we ask everyone to donate blood. In London, it's very easy. There is a blood donation point just near Oxford Circus. The appointment only takes 1 hour. As you can see, I did go there and to give blood, and then you will be saving a life. Sharif provided a quick update. So he had a bone marrow transplant surgery back in December. He was discharged from hospital last week, and he was given bags and bags of medication that he needs to take every day to support his new immune system, which is fighting leukemia. So he is feeling very fatigued at the moment, but he's happy because he is with family right now, but he ended up spending his birthday, Christmas, and New Year's in hospital. The next 100 days will be crucial because to see if the chemotherapy and the transplant surgery actually will stop the cancer. So that's the update on Sharif. Quick reminder of the code of conduct, because we are a very comfortable and welcoming community to everyone. Please be nice and respectful to each other. Agenda for tonight, I'm going to give you a very quick update on OWASP upcoming conferences and events. Then we're going to have Rishi talk about DNS-based open source intelligence techniques. We're going to have Gaëtan to talk about how to steal GitHub tokens from Docker images. There's some very interesting research that they've done. Then we're going to have a bit of a break, a networking and comfort break. If you haven't had a chance to have some pizza, pizza's in the corner, and we have a swag table as well. Please make sure you use this. And we're going to have, after the break, we have Tharinda from Docker is going to talk to us about how to secure SDLC from contained images to AI agents, because obviously everyone is now talking about AI and AI agents, and we'll see how you can do it. Then we're going to have a raffle and the prize giving. If you haven't registered for the raffle, I will show you the QR code in a minute again. And then we have to, because we have to vacate this wonderful venue at 9 o'clock, we will go to a pub, which is next door, called the Nave of Clubs. You've probably seen it if you walked from Liverpool Street. Okay. If you haven't scanned the QR code yet, please do it now, because the raffle prize for tonight is absolutely awesome Lego set, the Star Wars Jango Fett Fire Spray Starship. And there are more QR codes around the venue. I will show this again just before the raffle. The raffle has been kindly donated by, the prize has been donated by Newware, Guardian, and Docker, who are sponsors for this event. But sure, if Sarah from Newware wants to come and say a couple of words, or yeah, we have Chris.
I'm not Sarah, obviously. Yeah. I'm Chris from Newware. That you take 1 minute of your time, because looking at that agenda, there's a lot of good stuff to come. But yeah, we're Newware, one of the sponsors today. We use OWASP as pretty much a gold standard for our application security compliance, regulations, market trends, and that informs a vendor portfolio that we take to market through our Newware and our parent company Exclusive Networks, who are a big cybersecurity distribution company. 10,000 reseller partners, professional services partners, and systems integrators globally that we take our solutions to market with. 2 of those are actually co-sponsors today, which is GitGuard and Docker, so thank you for them. I think, Sam, you've covered pretty much everything else about the swag. Help yourself. There's a bit left. the prize, which we hopefully see some of you at the pub in a couple of hours. Cheers.
Awesome. Okay, now, by the show of hands, how many of you are here for the first time? First time at OWASP. Wonderful. So good to see you here. I have no idea how you found us, but to make sure you don't miss the next event, what you can do is you can follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Slack, on Meetup, on Eventbrite, on LinkedIn, on Blue Sky, right? We also have an old-fashioned mailing list which you will find on our webpage, owas.org/London, if you want to sign up and if prefer to receive an email. It's a very low volume mailing list. I only send out notification when we're going to have the event. To make sure you don't miss the next event, I can tell you now, I think the next event is going to be 26th of February. So if you want to mark your diaries for now, because I just got the sponsor confirmed for this one. Then usually we have a video here talking about OWASP, but I'm not going to play it because we had some audio feedback issues. Just quickly tell you that obviously OWASP has a massive community worldwide. We are obviously open worldwide application security project. We are open source. We have not just chapters, as you can see, 250 chapters all around the world with 178,000 members. Everything we do is free and open source, providing free standards, guidelines, resources for and tools for everyone to help them to educate them themselves about application security and risks and what they can do to code securely and address other application security risks. And let's not forget that everything's an application. Your mobile phone is running applications. Your cloud is an application. And most interestingly, AI, of course, is also a software application.
I think it's analog nowadays. Everything is an application.
That's right. So we are not the only chapter in the UK. So if you live closer to these cities, please do make sure that you check out local chapters as well. So we are in London, but there are chapters all around the UK. Just want to acknowledge that they exist. And if you have friends who are interested in learning about cybersecurity and application security, who live near these cities, I highly encourage you to tell them that these chapters do exist. OWASP as an organization has a membership, so we have a paid membership. It's very affordable. It's only $50 a year, and students get a discount. It's only $20 a year. If you are not a member yet, I highly encourage you to join. You can just go to owas.org/join. If you represent an organization, obviously we have some corporate sponsors here tonight, like The Guardian, Docker, and Newware. But if your organization would like to sponsor OWASP and become a corporate member, please come and speak to me because I will be able to put you in touch with relevant people at OWASP. And by sponsoring OWASP, you will highlight your dedication to supporting open source security and our community. Now, if you become an OWASP member, if you're not a member yet, there are a few benefits available to you, apart from things like access to a lot of our conferences recording. You also get access to also have checkmarks, code bashing, secure coding training platform as well, available complimentary to all paid OWASP members. There is one other extra thing that I do personally because I have a stash of vintage OWASP member stickers, which OWASP doesn't do anymore, and which I still keep for over 10 years. So as you can see, there's one sticker on my laptop here. So if you become a member tonight, please come and see me and show me the confirmation email that you become a member, and I'll give you one of these exclusive vintage stickers. See, we have a prize tonight. If you haven't scanned the QR code and entered it, please do. I will replay the QR code one more time a bit later. Want to say and acknowledge all our sponsors because there are lots of organizations who also sponsor our chapter specifically, and we are a non-profit organization, so we wouldn't be able to exist without support of our corporate supporters. We are though vendor neutral, so this is why we welcome everyone to our one big community. If you would like to sponsor an event like this one in the future, please come and talk to me, and we will arrange and schedule an event in the future. And now, can I please ask you to give a huge round of applause to tonight's sponsors, Newware, Guardian, and Docker. Now, this year, OWASP is turning 25 years of talking about security vulnerability, SQL injection, and cross-site scripting. I cannot believe it's been 25 years. We're one of our regional OWASP founding members here. Yeah, it's unbelievable. We're going to have a celebration event. Our chapter was selected as one of 12 OWASP chapters who will be having a celebratory event in March. I don't have the date yet. It's probably going to be in the middle of March. So I'm currently talking to sponsors to get the venue and sponsorship arranged. But be prepared. We're going to have a party, and hopefully we're going to have a cake, which is very important, right? Okay. One other thing that I do is I provide a digital sticker or a proof of attendance NFT. If you would like to learn and collect them for your crypto wallet, please come and talk to me. Basically, I create this digital sticker pull-up, and our OWASP is wearing different outfits and it's different places because it's January. Our OWASP this time is wearing a warm coat, and you can see, well, we can probably see it's a Brick Lane. So we have Brick Lane next door. I only know some people planning to go and have a curry after the event tonight. So yeah, if you would like to play, please come and see them, because the only way you can get that sticker is by scanning a QR code from my phone and then adding it to your crypto wallet or sending it to your email address. So big conference announcement. We're going to have a big OWASP Global AppSec conference in Vienna in June. If you're an organization as developers or security specialist, you can send your employees there to learn. It's going to be a massive event with lots of tracks and 1,000 attendees. However, if you are a cybersecurity speaker and would like to submit your talk, because obviously we have 3 talks tonight, maybe our speakers tonight will submit their talks as well. Call for papers is open until February 3rd. So if you scan the QR code, you will be able to submit your talk proposal to OWASP Global AppSec Vienna. Now, obviously, OWASP is all about open source projects, not just about community. We have over 250 free and open source projects available to you. So it's not just the OWASP top 10. However, the most popular project of the day seems to be OWASP Agentic Top 10, Agentic AI Top 10, which just been released. So please do check it out. And very quickly, I'm going to talk about our official OWASP training. So for the first time since 2018, we're going to have an official OWASP Training Days event, which is going to be happening from February 25th till 27th. So there will be training courses, which will be at King's College, London Waterloo campus. Okay, you can scan the QR code for the information. These are the training courses that will be there. There will be 1 day, 2 day, and 3 day API security, on security champions programs, on how to build application privacy in the shadow of AI, threat modeling, how to build application security program with OWASP SAM, how to build a high-value AppSec scanning program, learning about web application security essentials, mobile hacking lab. So we have hacking Android, iOS, and IoT apps by example, which is a 3-day training. And then we have a full penetration testing, hacking a 3-day training with a lab, 100% hands-on training course with a lifetime lab access. So if you would like to participate yourself, or if you represent an employer, please do speak to your bosses if you would like to be sent to this training. This is a paid training because it's also fundraising for us, but it is an official OWASP training with official OWASP instructors. Okay, so we're going to move into our talks, and just a reminder to people in the audience, we're going to be taking questions, of course, with a microphone, but if you have a question, please be ready to ask questions using Slido, slido.com/OWASP. You can just open it on your mobile phone and ask the question there, and I will replay them. And similarly, for people who are watching us online on YouTube, please use the Slido system rather than the YouTube Q&A. And I would like to introduce our first speaker, who is Rishi C. So Rishi is a senior security researcher who has done a lot of work and contribution to open source vulnerability related systems and platforms. That includes OWASP AMAS. Rishi is one of the main contributors there. OWASP NetHacker, which is a project I'm a leader of, but also Rishi regularly contributes to Project Discovery. So if you know what Project Discovery is, and I'm pretty sure you'll be using some of the nuclear templates created by him. We are very pleased to have him here tonight with us. He's going to talk about DNS-based open source intelligent techniques. Let's everyone welcome Rishi. No, we'll be using this one. Just my phone. So.
Fantastic. Thank you for that introduction, Sam. Really appreciate it. And it's an honor to be talking here in front of you guys today. So I've got a pretty light talk for you guys about DNS-based OSINT techniques for product and service discovery. Now, just a quick raise of hands. How many of you know what DNS is? Okay, great. If no one raised a hand, I'd be pretty concerned. How many of you use DNS TXT records for product and service discovery? Okay, awesome. Not too many, so hopefully you can learn quite a bit today. So a bit about myself. I'm a security researcher based in London. I work for a cyber risk management company called Kind. So we've got offices in London, also Porto and the States. And a lot of my role involves researching into vulnerabilities and looking at different products and services over the internet and fingerprinting, different firewalls such as Fortinet, SonicWall, etc. And yeah, today obviously I'll be talking about DNS OSINT techniques on how we could detect various different products and services which typically aren't discovered via HTTP headers or within the HTML body when you access a page. So a bit about DNS for those who didn't raise your hand. DNS basically acts as the address book of the internet and essentially maps domain names to IP addresses. As you can see, we've got quite a few DNS types. We've got A records, PTR records, MX records, which is used for mail services, CNAME, and of course, TXT records. Now, TXT records is what we'll be looking into today. And it's essentially a DNS record type for storing text data. Now you have like various different types such as SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, which are typically used for email security. And in addition to that, we have app security or third-party services, which is what this talk will be about today. And finally, we can have anything else. By anything else, I literally mean anything else. Like you could add a TXT record, which says, OWASP is awesome. And yeah, so this slide here essentially goes into a test scan I'm running against adobe.com. Now this tool I'm running is DNSX, a tool by Project Discovery. It's open source. And you'll be able to see to the left, we have the domain name, which is of course adobe.com. We have the record type, which is TXT. Now the text in green is essentially the product and service, which is the most important thing we'll want to focus on today. So you'll notice, there's OpenAI, GlobalSign, Atlassian, Google Site Verification, Cisco, and Drift. Now that could obviously tell us they're running those particular services on their infrastructure without obviously even touching their infrastructure. Now, we have a verification string, and all this really is a string which tells that third party that, that domain belongs to, them essentially. Now, that doesn't really mean anything to us. It essentially allows, that third party to, verify that domain essentially. But yeah, the text in green is the most important thing here. So you can see they're running a number of services, and you might wonder why this could be useful. Is mostly because these services you typically can't detect via HTTP headers or HTTP response bodies. For example, from the top of my mind, I would think that, you can't detect global sign infrastructure from, externally facing assets. And I see that as, quite a big win, being able to detect global sign. Because think of, red teaming, for example, or think of, you're a bad actor and you want to find infrastructure a company uses. You could essentially put together a phishing email, which looks like a global sign form. And you could send that to the CEO and they'll likely fall for it because you have that, additional knowledge that they're running global sign infrastructure. And, typically CEOs, like they sign a document and they move on to the next one. So it's, it comes second nature to them and they don't necessarily think about it when they, sign documents. So yeah, that could be, quite a useful, way to utilize this. But yeah, outside of that, there could be dangling TXT records. So what if a company has a service, they no longer use it, but their TXT records might still be there. Now that's something, you'll need to be mindful of. So don't always take this as, definitive, but they're running these, services. Now, quick raise of hands. Who works in incident response and deals with supply chain attacks? Okay, not many. You might be aware of the Salesloft drift supply chain attack, which took place in August and September of last year. And essentially, bad actors stole OAuth tokens from the Salesloft drift app, and they'll use to access Salesloft data and steal gigabytes of company data. Now, major companies were affected by this, such as, Workday, Adobe, Cloudflare, NetApp, etc. And with this technique, we could easily utilize, DNS TXT scanning. So as you can see, I've run a quick scan on a couple of domains, and we could see, Adobe, Workday, Cloudflare, and NetApp are running DNS Salesloft drip products and services on their infrastructure by simply querying DNS servers. And another useful thing about this technique is you don't necessarily have to touch target infrastructure in order to detect these products and services. So these companies will never know that that they're running this infrastructure because you're querying DNS servers as opposed to target infrastructure on these companies itself. But yeah, this is again using a tool called DNSX. Later on, I'll be doing a demo on two open source tools, OWASP Amass and Nuclei. So look forward to the demo. And yeah, you might be wondering why this might be useful. Many ideas come to mind, but the top three can be prioritize threat hunting. You can also assess third parties risk by understanding shared supply chain exposure. And finally, you can also accelerate incident response through proactive detection. And of course, this goes without saying, you could also run this through Amass and Nuclei. So a lot of my work last year built this integration into two open source tools, Amass and Nuclei, which I will go through now. So I've got a quick demo for you guys. Fingers crossed it works. Okay, so if we look at Amass first, so Amass is a framework, and essentially you'd have to run the enumeration command before you can query the data. Now, the enumeration command is quite simple. I won't run it now because it might take a while, but I ran it before this presentation. But it goes like Amass, enum, -d, and then your target. Sure. Can you see that? So this would be your enumeration command, and that will go through your scanning of any given target. Once that is completed, the way in which a mass stores the data is in a database, which is automatically set up locally. And the way in which we can query that database is using triples querying language. And I've got a command here, which is the assoc command, which queries the database locally. And you can see that. You can see that they've got these services by these companies that are associated with OWASP.
You need it. Let me. Yeah, can actually stick it on. Sure.
So yeah, they've got these they've got these companies which are associated with OWASP, which obviously you can tell they're running Atlassian services, Microsoft services, etc. Now this is quite simple to run as well. And if we switch over to Nuclei, I run a quick scan on google.com. And you can see that we've got a couple of matches as well. So we can see Google have Apple services, Facebook, they're utilizing Google Workspace, which of course makes sense. DocuSign, Cisco Cloud Intelligence Platform, which is quite useful actually, because you typically can't detect that, via the traditional HTTP body response scanning, and of course OneTrust. And yeah, this is typically how I run these scans. The commands are quite simple, and these, so this one in particular uses a Nuclei template, which is of course accessible via GitHub if you were to contribute to the Nuclei open source repo. So I do have the files open over here. I don't know if you can see that. Let me zoom in. So this is the Nuclei template. You've got obviously basic information about the template itself. And of course, you've got each verification matcher. So for Keybase, you've got, you're matching on this keyword within the TXT record. And of course, you've got, a whole load of verification strings, which it would automatically go through when running the command one by one. So yeah, you could, see Dell, 1Password, etc. And the amass integration is done via plugins, and it's written in Go, and the mappings are over here. So it's obviously quite similar in that you've got the verification string and the associated company, such as BugCrowd verification, and it's related to BugCrowd Incorporated. Now, the best part about these tools is they are both open source, as I previously mentioned. So any one of you can contribute and build on this list. Now, obviously, we would need to verify these strings are actually in place when you open these PRs and submit them to GitHub. But yeah, everything's open source. You can see exactly what's going on, how the code works, how it's all running. And yeah, that's the demonstration complete. Fortunately, it worked to plan, but yeah, that's kind of everything from me today. Does anyone have any questions?
Are you noticing many vendors obfuscating or not using like plain text so this can't be done?
Sorry?
Are you noticing many vendors say Google AWS, they put these keys, they tell you to put these keys in your DNS records. You notice some vendors who give you like a random token or something that can't be traced back in this way, or is everyone just putting their name in plain text?
Yeah, that's another verification method. So you might be referring to entering admin at knowyourdomain.com, and people would typically enter a code. Now that's obviously you can't really, trace back that product or service to infrastructure, and obviously that's great for privacy. But the thing is, I've not kind of seen many services or products do that. If they have the option, obviously I'd recommend taking that. Otherwise, then obviously, it'll be all public through DNS records. But yeah, it's a verification method which is currently out there.
More questions? Oh, yeah.
Hi, Rishi, thank you for the demo version. My basic question, I just actually put on Slido, I'll ask you anyway. That what's the most ever obvious or even really problematic sort of vulnerability you discovered? Let's say, for example, that if you were to penetration a company's platform and that sort of thing, even their own developers they know.
So your question was discovering vulnerabilities,
I
and
think it's like low hanging fruit, right? Things which shouldn't have really happen.
It's really an obvious case.
yeah, absolutely. So this this technique, I typically use it for recon prior to the pen test. So you could potentially say companies are vulnerable if the vulnerability had come out within hours of disclosure. Now this technique isn't, I guess, used for detecting vulnerabilities per se. But I mean, if you have like the advisory and the vulnerability disclosure links, a couple of hours or minutes later, you'd be able to have, say with full confidence or with high confidence at least, a company is vulnerable to CVE-X or supply chain, attack X or Y, for example.
Okay, let's thank Rishi for also talk.
Got the microphone.
Sure.
Here. Okay, next up we have Gaëtan from GitGuardian. Gaëtan, you here? Just quickly share my screen while Gaëtan is coming. Or probably easier. Let me. Yeah, sure. So I will introduce Gaëtan. So Gaëtan is a security researcher at GitGuardian. He found quite a lot of very interesting vulnerabilities. By show of hands, how many people here use either Cisco, Nexus, or Apache web server? Okay, I have bad news for you because Gaëtan found lots of critical vulnerabilities in these two products, and this is how he's very well known in the information security community. He travels around and speaks at various conferences, and tonight we are very privileged to have him because he flew all the way from across the channel from France to be here with us. So let's all welcome Gaëtan.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to do the travel to come here.
Try to share your screen.
Doing this. Yeah, I'm slightly shorter. All right, is it working?
Yes.
Seems to be working. Yep. All right, thanks for being here. Hello, everyone. And let's talk about GitHub tokens, Docker images, and workflows. Okay, I've just been introduced, so you know me better than myself. If you want to reach me out on the socials, here are my 3 links. So I'm a security researcher with a background in offensive security, as you may be understood by now. And I currently work at GitGuardian, a company specialized in secret detection and NHI governance. One pretty interesting thing is every year we publish a report that's called the State of Secret Sprawl, which goes into depth explaining and studying the state of secret sprawl, basically. It's packed with a lot of statistics and case studies around secret leaks and things like this. If you have never read this report, I encourage you to have a look. It's really great. It's non-paywalled, non-protected, completely free. And the new version for 2026 will be released in the few coming weeks. It's great. But let's dig into our topic, and I'd like to start with a quick introduction on how we came out with this topic and how we started looking into it. So basically, in December 2024, somewhere around that time, Git Guardian scanned Docker Hub, more or less everything from Docker Hub, with slight simplification. Because Docker Hub is huge, as you can see here, it's evaluated to around 11 petabytes of data, so we had to reduce the set of things we scanned, but we ended up scanning 16 million layers from 15 million images and all the configuration from those images. Quite some work. And since then, we are continually scanning Docker Hub. And all over that time, so since late 2024, we detected 240,000 GitHub server-to-server tokens, which was quite of a surprise. It's a pretty big number, which made us think, okay, where do those come from? What's the issue with GitHub server-to-server tokens? And that's what we are going to look into today. With the first question, what is a server-to-server token in the first place? So I guess a lot of people here know GitHub pretty well, use GitHub probably. You probably already know a lot about GitHub tokens, which are used to reach and authenticate on GitHub API. Actually, there are 5 different types of classic tokens, which are different from the fine-grained token. I won't talk about fine-grained token today. With a very well-known one, which is the GHP, the GitHub Personal Access Token, which is used basically to authenticate a user, you, me, everyone. And a bunch of other types. One is a GHO for ho-hos, there's the GHU, GHR, and one called the GHS, which is the GitHub server-to-server token. I asked my best LLM to define what is a server-to-server token. Basically, it's a token that will be used to authenticate an application against GitHub, a GitHub application. So basically, you register an application on your repo to do things, security scanning, for example, Git Guardian application. And this application will receive a token that it can use to authenticate on the API. So basically, those tokens are used for a wide variety of things. Basically, everything you can do with an application, there will be that kind of server-to-server token playing around. And one of those applications is a very well-known, very common, and very widely used one, and it's the GitHub Action. So here again, I'm pretty sure everyone knows what GitHub Actions are. If you don't, they are basically the CI/CD system of GitHub. So it's a workflow pipeline kind of thing. So a system that can run steps, build software, run tests, linters, things like that on your repo for a bunch of things. Workflows on GitHub are described in YAML files, like the one you can see here, without color for some reason. And those are stored directly inside the repository. And when you trigger a workflow under some condition, they will be run on what they call a runner, which is basically a server that will process your pipeline, build your software, and do things. One important thing is that in the action system of GitHub, there are off-the-shelf actions. So they have kind of a marketplace with pre-configured build steps. We'll see some in the next slides. And how does this work? So basically you have your runner that will run the pipeline, that will receive the workflow configuration. It will then connect on GitHub API, do some things, clone maybe your repository, push artifacts, and so on and so forth. And to do that, it needs some kind of authentication. And so basically, this is where the GitHub server-to-server token appears. So your workflow uses a token. So basically, every time a workflow pops, it comes to life with a server-to-server token, which is quite limited token. So it's a short-lived token. So basically, when your workflow will end, your token will die. And they are scoped to the repository and have low permissions by default. So by default, this token only had read access on the repository, meaning you can clone your repo from your runner, which is quite useful. And those permissions can be configured, obviously, because you might want to do some more things than just cloning. And this can be configured either at the repository level, so you can click in the interface of GitHub and say, I want my token to have more privileges. But you can also do this inside your workflow directly. You can say inside your workflow definition, I want my token to have write permission on the repository or some other thing. In the rest of the presentation, I might call this token GitHub token, because that's the name of the environment variable that is used inside the workflow to work with this default token. Okay, so basically you have this token that is used for pretty much everything. Every time your workflow wants to connect to GitHub. And yeah, workflows are used to build software, and this software is pulled from your repository. And to pull the repository, there is a very common off-the-shelf action. So one of those actions from the marketplace I was talking about previously, that is called actions checkout. It's a very common action that will basically pull your code inside the runner file system. And it uses the GitHub token to read the repository. It's basically equivalent more or less to a Git clone with the URL of your repo on GitHub and the token inside the authentication part. So it's sent over basic authentication, authorization basic, like in the good old web time. So in reality, it's slightly more complicated, but let's just consider it's a Git clone. So that's pretty nice, but there's a small catch. And this catch is this actions checkout will cache the token inside the Git cloned repository. So basically, when you call the actions checkout action, like it's done right here, you basically have a step inside your workflow that says, please call actions checkout, that will pull the repository inside your runner. You will end up with something like this, which is a .git/config file, classical one, with an extra section that contains the authentication information. And here, you can trust me, it's base 64 encoded, but there's a GitHub server-to-server token inside that file. Basically, this action is taking your GitHub token and pushing it on the runner file system, which is somehow fine because this file lives in the runner. Runners are isolated, so that's not really a leak yet. Because at some point, your workflow wants to do things. It's a CI/CD system. So your workflow will want to build software, publish software, to create packages, to do things. And maybe, for example, create and publish Docker images, which is also a quite common use case of GitHub workflows. And the nice thing is Docker also offers an off-the-shelf action to build and publish images, which is called build push action, that look like this. So here again, we have two build steps. The first one being used to log in on Docker Hub so that you can actually interact with Docker Hub later because nothing's free anymore. And then you have the call to the actual build push action that will take a build context and a Docker file and will build an image. It's pretty similar to what you can do with just the Docker command line, Docker build, Docker push. And yep, you have this push flag that says that after your image has been built, you will push the image on Docker Hub, maybe publicly. So that's fine. And as I said, it's not very different from building an image locally. So there's nothing wrong with using this off-the-shelf action. And in fact, the security of your build depends on what you put inside your Docker file. So as long as your Docker file is fine, you should be fine. The thing is, there are some mistakes that a lot of people do that in that very specific context can have quite big consequences. And this issue I have in mind is this one. Maybe you have already typed this in a Docker file. Hopefully some people here write Docker files. So this mistake is the copy.anti-pattern. So it's a very common anti-pattern. We see it pretty much everywhere. I have here a screen capture from Docker from GitHub. So I did this very little search for Docker files containing the copy.anti-pattern. And there are 1.4 million Docker files containing this. So it's very common. And what this does is that it will copy the whole build context inside a layer in the image. Basically taking everything you pushed in your build context and putting it inside a layer that will then live forever inside your image. Which can be bad in a lot of situations, but it's especially bad in our situation because the build context maybe contains the default token we pushed previously with the actions checkout action. So if we want to reconnect the dot a little bit, so we have here 3 parts. We have a workflow file with a call to checkout that will pull code on the builder, on the runner. We have another part of the same workflow that will build an image and push it on Docker Hub. And we have this simple Docker file that contains a copy.mistake. And what happens is when the checkout action is called, the token, so the default token will be pulled from the environment and pushed inside the repository clone on in the current working directory. Then we have the Docker build push action that will take the current working directory and push it as the build context to build the image. And the Docker file that will execute it will call the copy., that will take the whole context that now contains the default secret and will push it on in a layer inside the image. Last step, the build push action will take the resulting image that has been built and that now contains the secret and push it to Docker Hub. And that's basically how you end up leaking to 140,000 secrets on Docker Hub. So that's a lot of tokens, but how bad is that? You might think it's not that bad for 2 reasons. Because first, the privileges set by default on a token are pretty useless. The default permission, as a reminder, was read-only access to the repository, which is completely worthless because if you leak your token, you also leak the Git repository that was surrounding it. So you already have access to the Git repository. So the token itself is just useless. And also there is this problem of expiration. When your workflow ends, your token expires. So it will just expire at some point. Let's see how things turn out when we look into it a little bit further. But there's some other. So on the permission side, I've already told earlier that you can change the permission set on a token. And actually people do this. because if there is a permission system, it's because it's useful. So there are very common permissions that are widely set on tokens that serve some purpose. And I have listed here 5 different ones. So there's a contents permission that gives some permissions on the repository. There's the actions permission that gives access to the actions themselves, so you can modify the workflows. You have a slightly specific one, the ID token permission, that controls access to OIDC credentials. If you integrate your workflows with, let's say, PyPy, for example, you can authenticate your workflow using OIDC. And this permission provides this, but it's not bound to the token. It's completely different, so we won't be able to exploit it later. And the 2 last ones are pull requests to manage pull requests, and packages, which is used to manage permission on GHCR, which is basically the Docker repository of GitHub. And every single one of those permissions can be set to known, read, or write. And basically, if we want to be able to exploit a leaked secret, it must have permission, any of those 4 permissions set to write. So either contents, action, pull request, or package set to write, so that we can either write code to the repository, which would obviously be bad, push actions, workflows on this repository, merge pull request, or do other bad stuff on your repository. And so if you want to check if a given token has a good chance of having one of those permissions, you need to look into the workflow, and in actually 2 places. Because permissions can be set either globally on the whole workflow, like it's done right here. So the permissions here are defined at the workflow level, meaning that every job inside this workflow will inherit the permissions. Or they can be set more granularly at the job level, which means only this job will get the permissions mentioned, meaning right on packages, basically. Which means if you investigate this issue, it's important to really understand how permissions flow inside your workflow, because the job that calls action checkout must have interesting privileges, because that's the step that will actually leak the token. So that was for the permission set in the workflow. And as I said, the permissions can also be set at the repo level. So you can click and set the permission to write everything at the repo level, which cannot be easily seen either by looking at the workflow or looking at the leaked Docker image. But still, there can be hints in the workflow definition. So for example, here we have a small workflow that has no permission set anywhere. But that still calls git push at the end. So if it can push code, it's because it has the rights to do so, and so most probably the repo has been set to use write permission for everything. And similarly, there are some off-the-shelf actions from the marketplace that also recommend setting the write permission on the token. And so if you see those actions called, there's a good chance that the permissions have also been set. So permissions won't save us for this issue, or at least there are cases when the token will have interesting permission. And so everything that's left is the timing issue. As we said multiple times now, the workflow ends, the token expires. And so the question is, when will my workflow expire? When will my workflow end? And so my token expire? And to answer this question, there are 2 main things to look at. The most trivial case is the one when the workflow will continue execution after having pushed the image. There are a lot of reasons why this could happen, because you pushed an image to Docker Hub and now you want to deploy it, so you will call further steps to deploy this image to some environment somewhere. Or maybe you want to sign your Docker image, so you will have to compute a signed signature and then upload it, or some other things. And so while you are doing those things, your image has been published, the token has been leaked, but your workflow continues, and so your token is still valid. Here is a small example from a real-world workflow that calls build push actions twice. which is obviously interesting in terms of timing because the first workflow might leak the token, while the second build push action will build an image and so take some tenths of seconds, maybe minutes or even some hours for big images. And during that time, the token is exposed and exploitable. Another typical example is this one, where you have first a call to the build push action that might leak the secret, and then you have a bunch of other steps to install cloud command lines, thingies, to deploy the image in production. So that's the trivial case. But even if you don't have anything run after you build push action, you might still have time to exploit the token. For one reason, that every step, every action you call inside your workflow can register a post action, which is basically a new action that will run before the end of the workflow in reverse order of execution. So for example, if you clone, I don't know if I have an example for this now. So if you clone the repository, then call the build action, before your workflow end, you will have a post action for the build action and then a post action for the checkout action. So every action triggers a post action, and those actions can also take time. And among the most common Docker-related actions that have post actions that take time, we find the setup QEMU and setup buildX action that are very commonly used if you build native application in Docker images, and also the build push action as a post action that will take time. And so here, for example, I hope you can see this. We have an example of the result of the execution of a workflow. So it's a pretty classical workflow. It starts by checking out the repository, then calling some Docker initializations, logging on Docker Hub THCR, then build an image. And that's where you have the 1 hour time. So here the image builds. And after that, you have the post build, the post login, post setup, post run action. And all those post action take 30 seconds to run, which might be enough to exploit a token. In this other example, which is also quite classical, with nothing really fancy, we raise up to 16 seconds. All right, I have absolutely no idea how I am. Okay, how much time do I have? Okay, it's open bar on the timing. Perfect. So I'll try this demo, praise the demo god. So I have a workflow defined here, which is pretty simple. So it basically does what I've presented before. It checks out the repository, so leaking the token, log into Docker Hub, build and push an action, and then does some false deployment, so basically a sleep 30 seconds. Best deployment ever. The idea is it simulates an actual deployment, and it runs on the push action. Every time a commit is pushed to this repository, this workflow will trigger, and all the steps will run. And on the other side, I have an attacker script that will try to leak and exploit the token, and here, small command to just push some content to it. I'm going to open this action view, working. And I'm going to push a commit. Ha! Nice. Oh, come on. When you need to do it, you need to do it. Hopefully it will, okay, it won't do it. Okay, that's better. So in theory, this should trigger the action, the workflow. It won't trigger the workflow for some reason. Okay, that's a failed demo live just for you. Okay, let me have a quick look. Inside. Should be working. Ah, it's actually running. Time to leak the token. Quick, quick. It's race condition. Run, run. Maybe I was too fast. No, it's good. So in theory, so this just waited for the workflow to trigger. I'm just trying to figure out if it worked or not. No, it failed, just because I was too fast. Just going to run it again. No, pray I'm not too slow. Okay, it's better. So basically this will download the image that I've just pushed while the workflow is still running, find the token, collect the token, use it to clone the repository, which is a private repository here, and push a new commit inside the repository. And in theory, if that worked correctly, I should have now a new file that's called Git Guardian, and that says, "Ooh, I've pushed a malicious commit on your repository." Not the best demo ever, but it ended up working. That's really something. Okay, so that's an attack, and it works sometimes. Now comes the question, how do I change my workflow? How do I make sure I'm not vulnerable to this? And here comes the first good news of this presentation. Ta-da! This issue has been fixed somehow with the version 6 of Actions Checkout. So if you use Actions Checkout, I'm pretty sure someone here uses Actions Checkout, make sure you move from the V5 or lower to 6. Because now this action doesn't store the credential inside the .git config anymore, but in another place on the runner that is not in the current working directory. So you have zero chance to leak your token if you use Actions Checkout in version 6. Good news. And if you don't want to do it, or if you do it, but you still want to do some defense in depth, there are also a few good practices, best practices when building Docker images that you want to look into. And the first one is, it's really my favorite one, because no one knows this, but it's actually something. You don't need to call the clone action, the checkout action at all to build Docker images. In fact, the build push action is capable of handling, finding, downloading the context and building the image all alone without you calling the checkout action. It does so with not very well-known Git authentication for remote context mechanism of Docker build. Which basically can pull your repository using credentials that you provided. So in that case, it will just use the default token. Get rid of all the downloaded artifacts, so there's no .git or things like this in the cloned repository, and build your Docker from this. It's the perfect solution. It's like avoids leaking the token. It also reduces the size of your workflow because you don't need to specify a context anymore. It's just so good. A second thing is you probably want to use a Docker ignore file. It's basically similar to a git ignore file, except that it's for Docker. And basically, it will control a list of files that will be excluded from the context when you call Docker build. In that configuration, you can put basically .git, for example, to make sure that your .git repository won't ever be pushed inside the build context when you call the build action or the build command line, if you work locally. You can also put your .env if you keep some nasty secrets there. And it's generally a good practice, even outside of GitHub Actions. And the last tip is, if you can, try using multi-stage builds when working with Docker, because that makes smaller images and also avoids some leaks. So basically what you'd want to do is to push everything secrets, whatever are inside a first build phase that will actually build some artifacts, some software, some things. And then in a later phase, in phase 2, you will just pull the build artifacts inside your final image. Everything from the stage 1 will be forgotten forever. So if there was secret, disappeared. So that's pretty good. And you still end up with the result of your build inside the final image. So yeah, and if you, next time you write copy dot inside your Docker file, just think about me for a second. Something that is also quite important to remind is that the least privileges principle applies or should apply everywhere, including in GitHub Actions. So if you set permissions inside your workflows, which you probably do because you need them at some point, just make sure they are the least privileged possible. That's already something. And also make sure you apply the permissions at the smaller scope possible. So basically, you don't want to set up permissions at the workflow level because that will just apply to all jobs, including some that would not need those permissions. So please only use job level permissions. And a corollary of this, split your jobs as much as possible. If you have a job that calls a linter and that builds an action, you're probably doing it wrong. Do two jobs, one that calls the linter and one that builds the image. Because that way your linter call won't get the privileges needed to build an image. And so you are separating the privileges, basically. Yep. There's a way to call actions checkout with a custom token, basically a GHP, a GL, PAT, whatever. If you can, just don't do it, because those tokens won't expire with the workflow and are likely much more privileged, including they can have cross-repository privileges that your workflow maybe do not need. They can need it, in which case it's fine, but if they don't, just don't do this. And final word for me, beware what you push on Docker Hub, especially if you work from private repositories. If you've seen my example, I was running my workflow from a private repository. And this private repository was pushed as the Docker image on the public GitHub. It's a breach. Basically, my private code was pushed to the public Docker because I wasn't paying attention to where I was pushing my image. And yeah, that's a private code leak. And we see that very often. So just make sure you are pushing to private spaces. And that's all for me.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for an amazing talk. I actually have a question for you, right? So obviously you found all this images on Docker Hub. You mentioned 147,000?
240,000.
200,000 plus. But my question is, obviously, you found this, right? Which is absolutely amazing. The question is there any indication that there are people actually actively hunting for this? I don't know, nation state, or because I know there are a lot of people constantly hunting GitHub for big secrets, right? They're constantly running search like every few seconds, trying to capture an accidental leak token.
Yep.
Are you aware of anyone in the world actually doing hunting for the tokens you just demonstrated using this?
Those tokens specifically, I don't think anyone are looking for them because they look so useless. It's basically the point. People looking for secrets inside Docker images, yes, that exists, and we see people just using leaked secrets from images. I don't think they do this like automatically scanning the whole set of images, etc., because that's quite hard. We do it. It's pretty tough. Far more difficult than scanning GitHub live. So it's most likely not an automated system scanning all images, but most probably something that scans a smaller set of images, like for targeted attacks. Like I don't know, you want to breach a company, you will look for images published by that company, download everything, scan everything, look for secrets. That's most probably how it works for threat actors. And yeah, I don't think they scan Docker Hub actively. Maybe now they do.
Yeah, just big thank you for letting us know about the actions checkout, because I myself am guilty as charged, because I believe I have some GitHub repos using the
actually check out version 5, and I'm very
Everyone
lazy not to upgrade it. And now I'm gonna go home and upgrade it straight away. Okay, questions from the audience?
Actually, the version 6 is just like 3 weeks or 2 weeks old, so it's quite a new update. So if you have not updated yet, that's quite fine.
Hi, good talk.
Thanks.
I'm interested in what attack flows you think someone's actually going to use. The one that comes to mind is someone pre-identifies a repo and then waits for a push. But is there another way? Is there a Docker feed or something? That background?
No, there's nothing like a Docker feed. There are ways to detect new images and scan them live, but as I said, it's quite hard. So exploiting something like this must be prepared. You must be actively monitoring for a specific image that you know will leak a token, which is not what I did in my demonstration. I was just like hitting enter to run the exploitation script. But you can, it's completely possible to monitor a given Docker repository, looking for new versions, updated tags, things like this. And as soon as the tag is pushed, download it, find the token, exploit it.
Any more questions? Yeah, there's one. Yeah.
Hi, one word of warning and one question. The word of warning is if you are using Docker Ignore, be aware that they change the file naming conventions depending on which runner you are, so that doesn't mean it necessarily works. The question is, you did this on Docker, did you also look at any of the other repositories, like for example, AWS ECR or the Microsoft or other equivalents?
This experiment was run exclusively on Docker Hub because we had the data, and so we knew we could do it pretty easily. Most likely it will work exactly the same on AWS repositories and things like this. There is one very interesting case. I'm not gonna lie, I have not investigated yet, but it's a GHCR case. This one is particularly interesting because pushing images to GHCR requires the package write permission. So as long as you push an image to GHCR inside your workflow, your push job will have to have the package write permission. So if we can do this on GHCR, which I'm pretty sure is possible, you are absolutely sure that a token leaked there will have at least the package push permission. So you will be able to overwrite an image that has just been pushed if you are in the timing.
More questions? Okay, hold on, one, there's one.
A great talk. I'm just curious how you found this vulnerability. Did you look at the code in the background, or more like from an offensive strategy?
So everything came from this big number. Like when we scanned the whole Docker Hub and we found all those GHS, there had to be a reason. And so we first understood it. Basically, it happened like I described it in the presentation. We first tried to understand what a GHS is, where it comes from, things like this, and then we just pulled the wire, and everything came together.
Okay, let's thank Gaëtan for awesome talk. Right, we're going to go over to a 10-minute break now, so don't forget we still have pizza. If you have vouchers, we have free drinks. If you're not vouchers, we have time drinks. And yeah, we'll see you in about 10 minutes.
Oh, yeah, right.
Thanks. Fantastic. Thanks a lot. You've got this. Oh, you've got great. Oh, I got right.
More than a feet.
raise it, so yeah, they'll be back.
Yeah.
That's fine. I'll need to remember to stick the mic on you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. All right. Yeah, thanks for you. Yeah, that's it. If I go into present interview. Yeah, okay, because I'm sharing. If I stop sharing, then let me just this one thing. Right. Yeah. Yeah, but are you sharing? You're not sharing.
Oh, no, I'm not sharing.
You found the screen, but you need to
Yeah,
share the window. Right. Okay, let's see. And just a reminder, everyone, that also we have a raffle, and you can find the QR code for the raffle here on the pillars. If you have a scanner, please do scan to win. If you're lucky, they also let us know. Let's do it slightly different. Let's do it slightly different. Everyone, can you please start taking your seats? We're about to continue and have our next talk. And right, let me take this on you. Oh yeah. Maybe it's this way. Because I made a mistake with Gaëtan because he kept looking at the screen for 10 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Do you want me to share my screen or?
Okay, everyone, please take your seats. We're ready for the next talk. So Gaëtan already did a bit of some interesting things with Docker images. So and now we have a representative from Docker, which is a very kind of ironic combination. But I like this kind of mixture of talks, right? And we're very privileged to have Tharinda from Docker, and he is a lifetime open source contributor as well, so he worked with a lot of stuff. Currently, he's a technical account manager at Docker, and he's going to talk to us about securing the SDLC from container images to AI agents. Let's all welcome Tharinda.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, and as you said, I mentioned this to Gaëtan as well. He kind of set me up perfectly for what I'm about to speak to you all. And I'll try and keep this brief because I'm the only one between you and the trip to the pub, or you know, for anybody with young kids, bedtime, I suppose. So just to set the scene for my conversation, this graph, I'm sure we've all seen a version of this graph, open source exploding, and the usage of open source exploding is not news to any of us here. And this is essentially the open source downloads across all major ecosystems, including the container ecosystem, Docker ecosystem. And this is fantastic for me, someone like me who always worked in open source organizations. We've seen a lot of innovation being brought about due to this. But we get to build our software on the shoulders of giants, essentially. And what it also means is a lot of our applications, therefore, are built on code that we didn't write, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but also there are some risks associated with it. The second chart, I'm sure all of us have seen some version of this as well, essentially talks about the amount of CVs that have been climbing at an astonishing rate. What we can see there clearly is that the rate of CVs being published is at a much higher rate than the rate at which open source downloads are carried out across major ecosystems. Now, this is not really like, I don't mean to scare folks with this slide, but it's also important because open source is important, especially in the age of AI and agentic applications. And speaking of AI and agentic applications, what we've seen is that's not necessarily reducing the risk that we have to play with, right? It's when we give these agents autonomy and when we rely on non-deterministic systems, we don't really have full control over what's going to end up in our supply chains, what sort of malware is going to get pulled down by these agents. And this is a problem that we've thought about a lot at Docker. It's something that while we had a sort of front row seat to the explosion of open source, we've also kind of looked at this issue, and all of us here are here to sort of try and address this problem. What we realized at Docker was we've kind of seen this problem with containers as well. We've solved some of these problems about a decade and a half ago, and some of these are things like isolation, which containers do pretty well in limiting the blast radius of an attack. Things like minimizing what's inside a container. I think Gaëtan talked about this as well, including only what's absolutely necessary so that you reduce the attack surface. And I loved that he referred to multi-stage builds. You kind of reduce the size of that image to reduce the attack surface. And then also things like provenance, where these images come from, where what sort of information we get out of the images or get alongside the images is something that we believe is very important. And just kind of highlighting this as we talk about open source and AI and agentic applications, what we've seen in our front row seat is this is taking off in the age of AI, right? We feel a huge amount of stewardship towards not just securing containers, but also AI. As Gaëtan mentioned, Docker Hub has like 11 petabytes of data as the world's largest registry. And we've seen this, again, a sort of second growth spurt almost for open source, with LLMs, MCP servers being published as open source containers, content, and then containerized. And just to pivot from this sort of current standpoint, what in preparation for this, what I did was look at a bunch of publications over the last couple of years, and something that really stuck out for me was this publication by Black Duck that talked about how 89% of code bases that they evaluated or scanned had open source components that were more than 4 years out of date. That's stuff that's not been touched for 4 years, which is a bit nuts if you think about it. A good illustration of this is, I'm sure Shai Hulud would make some of us kind of think of sleepless nights from September to November last year. And this kind of harks back to what I talked about earlier. We build our software on top of stuff that other people have written, and we don't know what's inside these. And a lot of these packages that I'll show this in a second in a small, not necessarily demo, but in a small exercise, you'll see that there are these packages that we don't really need to be pushing into our applications. What I'm trying to get to with all of this is we are of the opinion at Docker that you could be doing SCA and SASD and all of these types of scanning, but application security kind of starts with your base image and your dependencies. If you're not kind of securing your base image, you're building a bridge on top of a cracked foundation. And so what we've identified is what we call, our lead security researcher is calling the 5 pillars of container security. And I'll talk about these in a second. And again, thanks very much, Gaëtan, for kind of talking about some of these, because you actually referenced some of these things in your talk as well. obviously the first one he mentioned was minimizing the attack surface. So only including what's required inside your Docker file, and therefore your Docker image being quite small. So reducing that attack surface and stripping out any unnecessary libraries, developer tools, things like that out of that Docker file is critical. Next, what we also see is making sure you have all of the information you require by way of 100% complete, not minimum, with no minimum depth, by way of SBOMs, right? So CISA has kind of defined a great standard around this that we highly recommend. The next one is also to ensure that there is verifiable provenance for those images, making sure there are attestations provided, such as SBOMs, that talk about who built the images, how they built them, what they used to build them, and making sure those are non-falsifiable. And also having standardized mechanisms to talk about the vulnerabilities that you're getting. If you have all of these SBOM information and the CVs and stuff, that's great. But if you don't sort of properly contextualize that, that's only going to add to the CV fatigue that developers all over are kind of encountering. And we are big fans of the VEC standard, for example. That sort of thing can provide developers with the right context as to which vulnerabilities are really relevant to them. And lastly, all of these things to be sort of non-falsifiable, right, and tamper-proof, so that anybody is able to kind of look at all of these attestations and say with a high level of trust, a high degree of trust, that these are legit, right? So these are the 5 pillars that we've kind of identified for container security, and these are all standing on what we feel is a base or a foundation of 100% transparency in all of these processes and artifacts that one delivers when they build container images. And what we've seen, and I work with a lot of our customers that kind of take this approach, what we've seen is a huge mind shift change in their organizations from a sort of security, from a trust standpoint, just developers saying, trust me, bro, to a verification process, right? Where there is sort of some legit tamper-proof proof, I suppose, to say, how these images were built, where they came from, and so on. And this is not just Docker saying this. We've over the years had lots of publications come out. NCSC published something 2 years ago about like using containerization, and there's a guide called Building Container Images that talk about pretty much the same stuff that Gaëtan referenced, that I'm talking about. And OWASP's own sort of top 10 OSS risks guide talks about some of these mechanisms as remediations as well. And so what we've done at Docker is we've published this thing called Docker hardened images that people can use on top of what we have by way of Docker verified, publish, and official images. So I'll give you a quick overview of what these look like. Just gonna change my share screen. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll kind of like use this tool that we call Docker Scout. It's our SCA tool that we use internally. And I'll look at a node image, one of the sort of latest node images. I'm just gonna. Right, and what Scout's gonna do is kind of give me the vulnerability information for this image, and you can see here that it's got like 179 vulnerabilities across 43 packages. And I'm gonna do a quick, actually, I think I have this. Yeah, so I'm gonna look for those sort of NPM packages from Shahilud. And then this is one of the latest NPM packages. And if you sort of go up here, there's like debug, chalk, all of these are the NPM packages that were exposed to Shahilud or infected by Shahilud like last year. Let's take a look at the hardened image that we have for this same one. And hopefully this works. If not, I've run this command before. Let's see. Okay, there we go. So this came out with no vulnerabilities at this point, right? In fact, when I tried this out earlier today, it looked like there was one uncategorized vulnerability, but it looks, probably we delivered a vex statement because of that. What I want to do next is I want to compare these two. I'm gonna just jump into Claude because it's gonna summarize these two images and give us a good summary of the differences. Oh, yep. Good shot. Thanks very much. Thank you. So let's think this should come out pretty quickly. It's probably gonna rack up a big bill for me, but we'll see. I think I've been expensive. Oh. Classic. My bad. Yes. Yeah. Cross all of your fingers and toes for me. Let's see. I think it's now you see the tokens racking up, and then at some point it's going to it's gonna spit out a result that's far too heavy. Right. So this is kind of what I wanted to show you guys. This is sort of a side-by-side comparison of the hardened image and the sort of Docker official image, which is what I previously checked. The vulnerability count, as you can see, obviously has been cleared. But more importantly, the size has been reduced by about nearly 90% here. 397 MB to 39 MB for the hardened image. We've removed, I think, a ton of packages out of that, and then improved several different policies, right? So changed that hardened image to a default non-root user. Again, something, thanks Gaëtan for mentioning this, using that principle of least privilege within that image. So this is a mechanism that we highly recommend folks use. It's a lot of vendors out there doing hardened images. Highly recommend you check those out because it's it's definitely going to add a lot of value to your developer workflows and your software supply chain security. So let me switch over to my presentation again and talk about how these sort of principles can now be applied to agentic security, right? AI agent security. Before we sort of jump into that, let's take a quick look at a very, very abstract architecture for what an agentic application looks like. So you've got sort of the LLM sitting somewhere. And then you've also got the single application with the agentic application connected to various MCPs that connect you to the various tools that you want to call. And then you've also got the sort of user interface, right? Now, the problems with this kind of architecture is, firstly, there's very weak isolation, right? There's an agent and an MCP that is connected and runs on the host directly. It's got access to all of your resources, which is kind of scary when you think about it. And then secondly, you've got these MCP servers connected to all kinds of tools, GitHub, that are able to essentially, carry out all kinds of actions on your behalf, and things like run arbitrary code on your repos. And then if we look at the interface layer, there are lots of vulnerabilities or exposures by way of things like prompt injection. There's no filtration of what's coming in and out of this. And then lastly, this is kind of my favorite quote from one of our security teams. LLMs can't keep a secret, right? It's like, if something gets leaked, it's probably going to be out there, and somebody could prompt it and extract what you've taught the LLM. And we've seen sort of the results of this already. These are some of the articles that I came across when I was kind of researching this. Lots of businesses have been stung pretty badly by this. And in our approach to fixing this and applying the containerization principles, what we also saw was there's a lot of industry publications that had arrived at pretty much the same conclusion, and OWASP has published a couple of guides around this, and we were glad to see we are in line with those. So let's look at how we apply those container security principles in the era of the AI agent. So if we look at the architecture, the first one we obviously recommend is isolation, right? As we did with microservices, you can isolate each of these individual components separately. And at the end, I'll talk about like what we've done at Docker to help with this. The next one is have some kind of secure and centralized way to orchestrate MCPs and have the MCPs not necessarily do it themselves, but have some mechanism to allow the MCPs to store credentials securely, to store authentication details securely. So something like what we've called an MCP gateway in this case, so that it's not able to do exactly whatever it wants when it comes to tool calling. And then also have some kind of layer around the agentic application that does monitoring the input and output. And if there are secrets, for example, sanitizes that output. And then, what we've done at Docker, and by the way, all of these capabilities are open source, so anybody can use this. So the first thing we kind of released, I think middle of last year, is something we call Docker Model Runner. That's available on Windows and Mac platforms, where you can easily manage or run and build LLMs. And you can sort of build these and store these as GGUF files or other OCI artifacts and store them on any container registry. And then we also built an open source, something we call the Docker MCP Gateway, which we've wrapped into something called MCP Toolkit that anybody can use again. And the MCP toolkit allows you to centrally manage the authentication, as well as, have a way to kind of orchestrate the various clients and the tools that you might want to use alongside MCPs. And this is closely coupled with the MCP catalog, which is a curated list that we maintain on Docker Hub of MCP servers that have been containerized. And lastly, this is kind of my favorite capability that we recently announced, which is Docker Sandbox, where you can run the agent within a container, give it access to whatever it needs access to, but there is file system isolation. So if suddenly the agent decides to nuke your whole file system, it really can't. Which, I think in the case of, in one of the examples I showed earlier, has actually happened several times. If you go on Reddit, you can see like lots of horror stories where Claude or Gemini has nuked someone's entire file system, right? So yeah, just to wrap things up, again, kind of referring back to my previous slide, this whole story around agentic applications, very much reminds us of where microservices were about a decade and a half ago. There was messy packaging and distribution around all of this. There's very big security, fragmented discovery, and also lots of governance and compliance gaps. So there are lots of vendors out there building all of these, but I think the message I want to share with you is we've kind of solved these problems before for different things, but if we can tactically apply those lessons learned as I talked about today, I'm sure we can secure agentic workloads as well. So I invite you to check those mechanisms out. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Tharinda, and many thanks to Docker for contributing to open source and open sourcing of the source tools. Very interesting to see, obviously, that the talk became a continuation of Gaëtan's talk with all the pillars of how to harden container images. Questions from the audience? This was all good. So the question that I have for you, is basically on the hardened images, right? That you demonstrated. How easy it is for users to go and find it? Because usually what I do, like everyone else does, we just go and say Docker pull whatever Python, Node.js, right? Do they need to do their pulls differently?
No, basically you can go to dhi.io, which is the URL that we publish these at, and you can see the entire catalog there. And for each image, you've got the pull command that's relevant. So, and also switching over to this, and lots of other providers have the same mechanism, I believe. You just need to, if there is a certain image that's referenced in one of your Docker files, switching over, at least in the case of Docker, is pretty easy. You just switch the Docker file to call the hardened image rather than whatever image you're currently using. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, wonderful. More questions? Yeah, there's one. 1 second. I'll bring the microphone to you.
As someone who's worked as a developer, but also in security penetration testing and things like that, I'm glad to see people talking about minimizing attacks and reducing libraries, especially the unnecessary ones. But how do you guarantee that in hardening the image, something critical doesn't get removed, which removes functionality that you're depending on?
Yeah, great question. So we typically, for us, when we harden images, we look at what sort of image it is. So we've got framework images, application images, and all of these different types of images that we've hardened. So our security team looks at the context in which an image can be used within a certain environment and removes them. And with our Docker hardened images offering, what we also deliver is a dev variant and a runtime variant. So for example, the runtime variant will not have, you don't need a shell in your runtime or a package manager in your runtime. So we will remove those for the runtime variant, whereas we'll keep those in the development variant. So that's kind of how we manage that risk.
Other question?
Just to clarify, saying that all functionality which was there in the original Docker image would be there in the current image as well.
Yes, yeah. So I mean, so in this node image, the functionality one would expect out of node 25.4 is in the hardened image as well. It would not have certain libraries or tools in it that you don't necessarily require, or common developer workflows might not require. Something we also do with and this isn't free, with PHI, we have like an enterprise capability as well, where you can include whatever tools or packages or certificates or whatever you want included in that as a customization on top of the hardened image, if it doesn't have what you require.
Thanks. More questions? Yeah, I see.
Thank you very much. Great job. This is a follow-up to the last question for hardened image. I have experienced a few months where a client from on-premise, and second request was to be composed with display with just Docker. We produce hardened images in which we deploy GKE, and the process of opening breaking. And when I raised it up to the invited me to the office and said, what are you using? I said, Docker. We didn't want to create new one. And they suggested we move out of Docker. It was frightening from Google to GKE. And I said, the acceleration rates for hardened and Docker environment. Has this issue been brought to before?
That's quite, I guess, high level. I can take a look at like what the exact issue is with you if you want, and like talk about it. I doubt that has to do with hardened images necessarily, but we can take that offline. I've got a couple of colleagues at Fazlan. Do you have any thoughts on that, perhaps? He said, yeah.
Just as sorry. Yeah, as a very general best practice, we have to have the file that isolation, but there are just so many factors.
Okay. Yeah, one more. Do you have any thoughts about how to incentivize people making these libraries and images to make them more like these hardened images from the get-go?
Great question. Short answer is no, but that thank you. That is something we can definitely think about. I mean, for us, again, kind of going back to the Docker file story, right? Starting with a secure base image would be a great place for anybody to start with. That doesn't necessarily incentivize any publishers to harden them or have deliver a library, for example, that is in line with hardened practices. What Docker and that NCSC guide provides is a whole bunch of best practices that does that. One way that folks can could be incentivized is using things like multi-stage builds reduces the image size, reduces therefore the amount of space that's required to store them. Yes, like S3 buckets are expensive, that sort of thing. I'll take that back to our product team to see if there's something we can do. Thanks. That's a great question.